It's always super tough when you run both pools to try and get it right between the rounds when they're off by a day. So it's always going to either be the men's rounds are done, but there's only the first set of games for the women's, or the women's round's done, but the men have kind of gone forward. And that's what I went for here. So you're going to notice all of these notes are actually before the first two games of the men's happened, even though we all know that if I'm talking about the last bit of the Sweet 16 women's games, that we know that the first two men's games have in fact happened. Play along. I tried to do the best. That's why the write-up is super, super short and kind of not really well written. I'll try and be a little better for the last one, but I wanted to get this out hopefully before at least the women's Elite Eight matches and before all the men are set. Let's see how I do. With 1-2, 1-2, 1-2, and 1-3 just being the way that both tournaments went, I could be talking about either one. I am going to talk about the men's first as we head into our Elite Eight after our Sweet 16 matchups. It wasn't that there wasn't close games. It's just every time it did, it just went to the team that was essentially the favorite. I mean, we still had some decent ones. Even some games that ran away were close in the first half. Take Florida, for example. It actually was tight at times, especially in the first half before they pulled away like crazy. Condon coming in after, they weren't sure about the injury. And what I think is really funny, and the only reason I mention this is I did note this down. I don't know if anyone else caught this, but Condon's Australian, and they do mention the Australian program, and they mention like Patty Mills, and I think Ben. I don't know if they mentioned Ben Simmons, but they're just mentioning one or two NBA players from Australia. And then they just seamlessly jump over to Serbian's national program and the Joker. And I mean, in any other given year, maybe I wouldn't question it, but when education levels of the country of the United States are just coming into question, and then an announcer does this seamlessly, like, I know they're international programs, but I have to ask, he knows it's not Austria, right? He's not pulling a Dumb and Dumber on us here. Like, he does know that they're not European teams and that Serbia and Australia are not really close to each other. So saying one sentence about Australia and then seamlessly just jumping into Serbia as if it's the same point of analysis, not great. Anyway, we'll focus on the good games. I think for a while, if you were watching Ole Miss and Michigan State, you were probably sweating it out a bunch because not too many people have Mississippi going on too much further, and a bunch of people had Michigan State going, and myself included, having going even further. So that was a breath of relief. I think, too, the Purdue-Houston game actually was a lot closer than we thought, and when I made reference in the article, there was a couple possessions near the end. I'll talk about it more on the women's side of things, but the push-off, not a push-off, another time that we have a game where we're talking about calls, and in fact, another no call. But I'll refer to that one later. The game that I thought was really, really interesting, when you get the Texas Tech and Arkansas, mainly because that was probably our best chance at seeing a double-digit seed. Well, it was our only chance of seeing a double-digit seed, but 3 is still our biggest upset, so that was going to be our upset pick no matter what. And it ends up being the second biggest comeback in Sweet 16 history with Texas Tech. But if you were watching it, and if you've watched college ball for a while, it's the same, just different. Calipari's teams, man, they just don't hit free throws, and they don't make great decisions at the end, and he doesn't always call timeouts when he's supposed to. So we get iso ball at the end for nothing, even though there was some movement to be had there. At some point in time, I guess you just know what you're getting with him. It's the fool me once, shame on you. Fool me 5 or 6 or 7 times. I mean, there's the if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But if it is broke and you still aren't fixing it, I guess that's kind of on the school at this point. And it did rob us of, this is probably a good thing, but they were breaking the record for Mateen Clease's moms in terms of showing relatives in the stands. If you watched the final he was in, you know what I'm talking about. The amount of times they just showed Calipari's wife and what I think was his mother. Probably best they're out of the tourney, and Texas Tech went through. Either way, it is kind of interesting, though, and one thing that I'm going to bring up on the women's side is these no calls, I think, are interesting for a different reason. But at least on this case, all of the calls, all the momentum just seems to be favoring the favorites, which has me thinking. It did make me look, it's been a couple years since all 4 made the Final Four in terms of number 1 seed on the men's side. And I mean, we could be heading into it again. I mean, if Florida, I do think is more of a flawed team, but when they're hot, they catch fire and they're impossible to stop. Duke looks pretty infallible, but obviously if injuries kind of play in. But realistically, I think probably most people are looking towards the Michigan State and Auburn as a real potential to have some kind of an upset. Although a lot of people that watched a lot of Tennessee do believe they could maybe upset Houston. Houston's defense just does make it look a lot tighter. Although if you watch the first half of that game, nobody was hitting any shots. I'm talking about Houston, Purdue. So either way, it might come down to all four. I think I'm cheering for anything, but honestly, at this point, I guess we'll just see. As I just said, the only 3 seed going through was the LSU over NC State, and that was an exciting one. It did kind of show some of the personality that we've seen with LSU teams in the past, but making the point I was going to make earlier, one thing I think is super interesting about the men's and women's games, just in sports in general, not just in basketball, it really does seem like men's leagues are really stuck on certain things, and anytime you try and make a change, it's like, well, but traditionally this happens, or in the pros it will go like this. Whereas women get to be more experimental, and if you look at like the way they're approaching all-star games, some of the rule changes, especially in women's hockey, if you're looking at leagues that are making assessments based on how to make something better and taking a few more risks, you really do have to look at the women's game. And the only reason I'm mentioning this is the men's games were littered with no calls. We've had travels, we've had potential offensive push-offs, moving screens. And then you look at the women's side, and if you watch the NC State LSU game, with 17.5 seconds left, there was a moving screen call on NC State, and it was, but you would never have that call in the men's game because the refs, I feel, would just, they might think there's more pushback, where in this case, the girl wasn't happy about it, but she kind of shrugged like, yeah, I did it, and they moved on, and that's why LSU hit some free throws, and we kind of pushed forward. I think the game that probably was another one we thought maybe an upset would go down. In fact, a lot of people, it was pretty split. I'd say more people had Notre Dame going on, and even some Notre Dame into the Final Four. TCU holding strong. Notre Dame is just really that same example I gave with Calipari. Tons and tons of talent. Great recruiting job. Great transfer. The number of transfer portals that came over. But they never really fully meshed, and they never made the right decisions at the right time. So they were just so close. They missed a bunch of buckets that really could have cemented the game. And then Hailey Van Lith is just cementing. I believe this is now her third school in 5 years, and she has never not made the Elite Eight. Now, she's obviously never won the thing, and TCU is coming out of nowhere. They were a program, they're already a Cinderella just to essentially be this far in the tournament, let alone be a 2 seed, let alone they might be one of the biggest chances to knock off a number 1. They're not the biggest. If I had to rank them, I think with USC getting hurt, Connecticut, I think a lot of people had them anyway. They're the most favored, I think, of a 2 seed. You look at LSU, UCLA, I think most people are going UCLA hard. I do think TCU over Texas is a coin toss with Duke and South Carolina. Duke just because they're one of the best defensive teams in the league. And South Carolina, if you think there's no drama there, you haven't been paying attention. They're now sophomore / TikTok hip hop artist that released the March Madness singles before and then got her ass benched because she wasn't listening to Don Staley. Take a look at South Carolina. They could definitely win this whole thing, but there's a little bit of dissension there. So now that I said it, UCLA will definitely lose and the rest of the number 1s will definitely go through. But while the men's side, I do think there's an outside shot of all 4 number 1s making it, I wouldn't be surprised to see 2 number 2 seeds making it to the Final Four. And no, that's not what my bracket predicted. That's just what me saying right now is saying. Although I would assume Connecticut kind of has to be the favorite. So they're a number 2 in spirit, but without the injury, if we could reseed, I think they'd get the number 1. This is going to be the tricky part where I can't hide it because I can't show. I should have filmed after just the guys went because I believe at one point in time it was Jake 1 and Jake 2. Now it's not because 2 of the 4 games have come through. Sorry about that, crew, but at least it's giving us a quick snapshot with 2 left on the guys' side. Chains is pretty happy with how things are going. Kevin's looking to make sure if he can get in front in the Duke fight. Ben with Houston looks to be the leader of the Houston crowd, whereas Rathwell right now the Florida crowd. Weirdly enough, Krista actually flipped. It was her daughter's brackets. Now it's hers in the money. And then Amari is hanging on because right now, as we're going to see in a second, he's one of the few left now that are double dipping in the men's and the women's. But let's be honest, it's going to come down to how many of the Final Four you got in. We already know 2. If it's 2 more favorites, this will shift even more. There is a scenario generated, but we'll get to that next round. Sorry for the halfway. It's just the way it works with the rounds. The women's, though, this is a little bit more tied and true. What we have here is the actual after the Sweet 16, before the Elite Eight. So congrats to Kelly on making a bit of a comeback. You were just below the money before. Now you're definitely in it. Jake, you lost some of your clout on the men's side, although you're right there when the second half games come in. Right now, tied with Amari, and you would split the second and third. But we see here right now, it's just going to be between the husband and wife here. Who can get the leverage going in? I think Jake lost a pretty big one in Notre Dame, if I'm not mistaken, whereas Kelly's still alive on a few more. Amari and Felix here are fighting for the South Carolina crew, where other Jake is going to have UCLA, and right now he's our top dog with UCLA. And that's what you really want to look for, right, is to make sure where you are in terms of the champions. We'll get to a bit more of an in-depth look when it's just Final Four, because at that point, it's easier to do a little bit of math. But we're only a couple days away from that one, so that'll be the next recap. As of right now, congrats for those who are currently in the money, and here's hoping you can maybe keep it. Although here's hoping maybe you can't, because I'm down here, and I'd like to be top 3, so go UConn. I wanted to try and keep this brief. Let's see how I did. It is not my forte, as we know, but just a quick snapshot before we get to our Elite 8 matchups, because at the end of this, I usually say things like, good luck on your Final Four, but by the time I send the next one, we'll know, because it's just 4 left in each. So we'll see if it's all number ones. A bunch of people are going to be really happy. I think a few of us are hoping for some 2s to creep in, but let's see what happens. We got a couple days left, and then one more weekend left, so we'll take all the basketball we can get. Best of luck, everybody.